A Navy SEAL member asked a black woman her rank as a joke, and 4 generals immediately saluted her. "Hey girl. What's your rank?" "Private Latte." The laughter echoed through the naval base hallway like a blade cutting through the morning air. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, 28, a Navy SEAL for 6 years and owner of an ego the size of the Pentagon, was clearly enjoying himself. His 5 teammates burst out laughing, turning the hallway into a circus of toxic masculinity disguised as military camaraderie. At the center of that storm of disrespect, a 34-year-old black woman stood motionless. Colonel Diana Washington, though no one at that base knew it yet, breathed in the 4-count rhythm she had learned during her 15 years of service. 4 seconds inhaling. 4 seconds holding. 4 seconds exhaling. 4 seconds holding. "Sorry, I didn't hear your answer," Morrison continued, approaching like a predator that had sensed vulnerability. "Or maybe you don't know how to read ranks yet. I know the Army has special programs for people like you." Diana had arrived at Naval Base Norfolk 3 days ago. Officially, she was there for a routine inspection of special training facilities. Unofficially, she was investigating allegations of systematic discrimination and abuse of authority that had reached the Secretary of Defense himself. What Morrison didn't know, what none of those men knew, was that Diana wasn't just another black woman in the military trying to survive in a hostile environment. She was the woman who had commanded classified operations on 3 continents, who had saved the lives of senators on missions that would never make the newspapers, who wore decorations on her chest that most of those soldiers could only dream of seeing. "Look guys," Morrison made sure to speak loudly so that other soldiers could hear. "We found someone who doesn't even know where she is. She probably got lost looking for the kitchen or the laundry room." For a moment, Diana lowered her eyes. Morrison and his friends interpreted this as submission, as confirmation that they had put another one in her place. They couldn't see what she was really doing, memorizing every face, every name on the name tags, every word that would be used against them when the time came. Because Diana Washington wasn't just an investigator. She was an expert in justice. And justice, she had learned over the course of her 15-year career, sometimes needed to be served with the surgical precision of a military operation. "Maybe we should teach some basic rules to our new visitor," Morrison continued, savoring every syllable of contempt. "Rule number 1, this is SEAL territory. Rule number 2, people like you take orders, they don't give them." Diana finally looked up. Her eyes met Morrison's with a calmness that stirred something deep in the Navy SEAL's mind, a primitive instinct whispering that maybe, just maybe, he was making a monumental mistake. But Morrison's arrogance was greater than his instincts. "Rule number 3, he continued, now practically whispering in her ear, "stay in your lane. Because if you try to get smart, I'll make sure your experience here is educational." "Understood," Diana replied calmly. Her voice was low, controlled, carrying a weight that Morrison couldn't quite identify. Very educational indeed. If this story of prejudice and justice touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple humiliation would turn into the most embarrassing moment in the career of an arrogant Navy SEAL, and how some people discover the hard way that underestimating the wrong person can cost them much more than they ever imagined. Over the next 3 days, Morrison turned Diana's life into a meticulously planned hell. He had spread the joke about the milk coffee soldier throughout the base, and now every meal in the cafeteria, every walk through the hallways, every moment in public spaces became a session of collective humiliation. "Look who's here," Morrison would announce whenever Diana entered a room. "Our expert in..." What was her job again? Oh right, no one knows. What hurt the most weren't the direct insults. Diana had faced worse in her 15-year military career. What hurt her deeply was seeing other soldiers, including some women and minorities, laugh along or look away for fear of becoming the next target. Morrison had developed a cruel system of jokes. When Diana sat down to lunch, he would approach her with his group and start asking questions about basic military protocol in a loud voice, as if she were a lost civilian who had accidentally infiltrated the base. "Tell us, what is the standard procedure for equipment inspection?" he would ask, savoring every moment. "Or is that too advanced for people in your field?" Diana answered every question correctly, with technical precision that would impress any military veteran. But Morrison turned her correct answers into a joke, imitating her voice or feigning exaggerated surprise. "Wow, someone memorized the manual. What dedication. What Morrison didn't know was that Diana had commanded operations where a single protocol error could cost American soldiers their lives. She knew those manuals because she had helped rewrite some of them after missions that would never appear in public reports. During her nightly walks around the base, a habit she kept up to process stress, Diana mentally reviewed every incident, every witness, every detail that could be used later. Her memory was trained to retain accurate information under pressure, a skill that had saved her life multiple times in enemy territory. On the fourth day, Morrison escalated his attacks to a dangerous level. During a morning physical training exercise, he accidentally bumped into Diana hard enough to make her stumble in front of the entire company. "Careful there, soldier," he said loudly, feigning concern. "The army doesn't have insurance for accidents involving visitors." But it was on Friday that Morrison made his first crucial mistake. During lunch, he approached Diana's table carrying his own tray and accidentally spilled orange juice on her military uniform. "Jesus! How clumsy of me!" he exclaimed, putting on a show of pretending to clean her up with napkins. "But look, now your uniform is more colorful. It suits you better." Everyone laughed, but this time Diana did something different. Instead of getting up and leaving as she had done before, she remained seated, took some napkins, carefully wiped up the liquid, and looked Morrison straight in the eye. "Accidents happen," she said calmly. "Especially with people who don't pay attention to where they're stepping." There was something in her tone that made Morrison frown. A subtle authority, a confidence that didn't match the inferior position he had assigned her. For a moment, he had the strange feeling that he was being evaluated, studied, catalogued for future use. "Of course accidents happen," he regained his arrogance quickly. "Some are more preventable than others." Diana smiled. Not a smile of submission or nervousness, but something Morrison couldn't quite decipher. "True. Some accidents are perfectly preventable. All it would take is for the person responsible to have a little more situational awareness." She stood up, discarded her tray, and left the cafeteria with the upright posture of someone who had received rigorous military training. Morrison watched, a part of him registering inconsistencies that his arrogance refused to process properly. That night, in her small quarters, Diana opened a laptop that officially should not have been in her possession. The screen displayed reports from multiple military bases, documenting systemic patterns of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of authority. The Morrison case was just one of dozens, but there was something about its particular systematic cruelty that set it apart from the others. She opened a specific file, Norfolk Naval Base Behavioral Investigation. Inside were photographs, discreetly recorded audio transcripts, records of times and dates, testimonies from soldiers who had suffered similar treatment, and most importantly, a detailed pattern of how Morrison used his position to systematically break the morale of anyone he considered different or inferior. Diana had meticulously documented every interaction over the past 5 days. Not just the obvious ones, but the subtle ones too, how Morrison changed his body language in the presence of senior officers, how he chose his victims, how he ensured there were always witnesses to his stunts, but never direct evidence of bullying. She quickly typed up an updated report, attached the evidence she had collected, and sent it through encrypted channels to an address that officially did not exist. Within 24 hours, very important people would be reviewing every word, every image, every second of audio. What Morrison didn't know, what no one at that base knew, was that Diana Washington wasn't there by chance. 3 senators had received confidential reports about a systematic toxic environment in military facilities. A 4-star general had lost sleep thinking about how American soldiers were being broken not by foreign enemies, but by their own colleagues. And when injustices reached that level of government attention, people like Diana were sent not just to document problems, but to create definitive solutions. Every humiliation Morrison inflicted was not only being witnessed by terrified soldiers in the cafeteria, it was being recorded, analyzed, and catalogued by one of the most decorated military investigators in American history. A woman who had survived interrogations by international terrorist groups and now needed to use those same skills to survive the very army she had served with distinction. While everyone laughed at that incident in the cafeteria, no one noticed how Diana had memorized every face, every name on the name tags, every person who chose to actively participate in the humiliation or who simply stood by and watched in silence. Because some people learn early on that true strength does not lie in reacting immediately to provocation. It lies in patiently building a case so solid that justice, when it finally arrives, will be absolute and irreversible. The following Monday, Morrison decided to elevate his humiliation campaign to a level he considered educational. During the morning briefing with the entire company, he made a point of seating Diana in the front row and began asking questions about basic safety procedures, as if he were testing a child. "Tell us all," Morrison announced with a cruel smile. "What is the standard protocol for entering a combat zone? Or is that too technical for visitors?" Diana responded with absolute military precision, citing not only standard protocols but specific variations for different types of terrain and threat situations. Her answer was so detailed and technical that some experienced officers exchanged surprised glances. Morrison, irritated at not being able to catch her in an error, decided to attack from another angle. "Impressive. Someone really memorized the manual. How about demonstrating it in practice?" He pointed to a state-of-the-art military communication device. "Set this radio to a secure tactical frequency, without consulting instructions." What Morrison didn't know was that Diana had operated much more sophisticated equipment on classified missions. She approached the device, and in less than 30 seconds, not only did she configure it correctly, but she also established encrypted communication with 3 different bases simultaneously. The silence in the room was palpable. Some soldiers began whispering among themselves. Morrison felt a twinge of uncertainty for the first time, but his arrogance was greater than his prudence. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. It was at that moment that Diana decided to plant the first seed of her strategy. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said calmly, "may I ask a question about command procedures?" "Of course," he replied, regaining his arrogant pose. "Education is always welcome. In your experience, what is the protocol when a senior officer identifies himself after a period of covert observation of base operations?" The question fell like a silent bomb. Morrison frowned, clearly confused about where she was going with this. That would depend on the specific situation. Why do you ask?" "Professional curiosity," Diana replied with an enigmatic smile that made several officers present uneasy. That afternoon, Diana received an unexpected visitor. General Patricia Hayes, a 52-year-old black woman and one of the highest-ranking officers on base, showed up at her quarters unannounced. "May I come in?" Hayes asked, and something in her tone indicated that it wasn't exactly a request. Diana invited her in, maintaining her facade as an ordinary visitor, but Hayes studied her with experienced eyes that had seen many battles and many soldiers over the course of a 3-decade military career. "You know," Hayes began, sitting down in the only available chair, "there's something about you that's been bothering me for days. I couldn't put my finger on it until this morning." Diana remained silent, letting the general lead the conversation. "Your posture. The way you speak. The way you set up that communication equipment." Hayes paused significantly. "I recognize advanced military training when I see it. The kind you don't learn in basic courses." For a moment, the two women studied each other in silence. Diana made a calculated decision. "General Hayes, I assume you have clearance for classified information?" "I do." Diana opened her laptop and, after a series of biometric checks that made Hayes arch her eyebrows, showed a screen that made the general sit up straight in her chair. "My God," Hayes whispered, reading the credentials on the screen. "Colonel Diana Washington, Special Operations. You've been officially dead for 2 years." "Officially, yes. Operationally, I'm very much alive and working." Hayes leaned back, processing the information. "Undercover investigation. Morrison and this whole situation. You're documenting everything. Every word, every action, every moment of systematic abuse. Not just Morrison, but the institutional pattern that allows this kind of behavior. He has no idea what he's done, does he?" Hayes began to smile, but it was the kind of smile that appears on the face of someone who has just realized that justice is coming. "Not just Morrison. I've uncovered a network of toxic behavior that spans multiple bases. Officers protecting other officers, creating environments where discrimination is not only tolerated but encouraged." Diana showed Hayes her evidence: audio recordings, photographs, detailed incident reports, testimonies from soldiers who had suffered similar treatment, and most importantly, statistical patterns that proved systematic discrimination. "This material," Hayes said, still processing the extent of the documentation, "will reach Congress. It goes further than that. 3 Senate committees, the Secretary of Defense, and the President himself will receive detailed reports. We are talking about structural reforms across the entire U.S. military system. Hayes was silent for a long moment. Do you need anything from me? Just continue to be an observer. Morrison will escalate further in the coming days. Men like him always do that when they feel they are losing control. And when he makes his final mistake, I need reputable witnesses present. Final mistake. Diana smiled, and there was something about that smile that made Hayes understand why this woman had survived classified operations and missions that had killed less prepared soldiers. Morrison is going to try to humiliate me publicly during Friday's ceremony. I know because I intercepted his communications with his friends. They are planning something they consider the final blow to put me in my place. How do you know that? Because arrogant men always follow predictable patterns. And because I have access to technology he doesn't even dream exists. On Thursday, Morrison set his final trap. During lunch, he approached Diana's table with his entire crew and a civilian authority from the city, the local mayor, who had come to the base for an official visit. Mayor Johnson, Morrison said loudly, making sure the entire cafeteria could hear, I'd like to introduce you to our special visitor. Perhaps you can explain to her how things work in the real world, since she seems a little lost in a military environment. The mayor, a 60-year-old man clearly uncomfortable with the situation, extended his hand politely. Pleased to meet you, Miss Washington, Diana replied calmly. And what is your role here at the base? Asked the mayor, trying to be cordial. Morrison anticipated with a laugh. That's a good question. We're still trying to figure that out. She showed up here a few days ago saying she was doing some kind of inspection. But as you can see, he gestured exaggeratedly, not exactly the typical profile for that kind of work. The mayor began to look even more uncomfortable, realizing he was being used to publicly humiliate someone. Actually, Diana said, her voice maintaining its calm tone but with a subtle authority that made several people at the table pay attention, my role here is quite specific. I'm conducting a comprehensive behavioral assessment for a Senate committee that's investigating patterns of institutional discrimination in military facilities. Morrison laughed loudly. Of course you are. And I'm the Secretary of Defense. Interesting that you mention the Secretary of Defense, Diana replied, maintaining direct eye contact with Morrison. Because my final report goes directly to his desk on Friday. Something in the way she said it made Morrison stop laughing. There was a conviction in her voice, a certainty that didn't match the vulnerable position he had assumed she occupied. Bluff, he said, but his voice had lost some of its arrogance. Diana opened her purse, took out an encrypted military phone that was definitely not standard civilian equipment, and dialed a number. General Hayes, this is Washington. Could you join us in the cafeteria for a moment? I think it's time for some formal introductions. The entire cafeteria had fallen silent, everyone watching the conversation that had clearly gone off the rails Morrison had expected. 5 minutes later, General Hayes entered the cafeteria in full dress uniform, her stars glinting under the fluorescent lights. She walked directly to the table where Diana was sitting, and what happened next made Morrison feel as if the floor was crumbling beneath his feet. Hayes stopped beside the table and, with all the military formality that 3 decades of service had taught her, did something that no one in that cafeteria would ever forget. She saluted Diana. A full, formal, respectful military salute. The kind of salute a general only gives to someone of equal or higher rank. Colonel Washington, Hayes said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria, I am deeply sorry for the treatment you received during your assignment here. I can assure you that corrective measures will be implemented immediately. Morrison stood frozen, his mouth open, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and the dawning realization that he had spent an entire week publicly humiliating a superior officer. Not just superior, but someone whose rank was higher than anyone else on that base, including the commander himself. The silence in the cafeteria was absolute. Every person present was processing what they had just witnessed. The Navy SEAL who had spent days calling a black woman a coffee soldier and questioning her qualifications had just discovered that she was literally his superior. Diana stood up calmly, returned Hayes' salute with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years perfecting military protocols, and then turned to Morrison with an expression that combined military professionalism with the utmost coldness. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, her voice now carrying all the authority of her true rank, I believe you have some explaining to do. Not just to me, but to a Senate committee, to the Secretary of Defense, and to every soldier on this base who has witnessed your behavior over the past few days. It was when everyone laughed that something unexpected began to take shape, not just in the stuffy cafeteria, but mainly in the determined look that now shone in Diana's eyes with an intensity that made some of those present realize that this moment of revelation was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change not only their lives, but the entire culture of that military base forever. The cafeteria remained in absolute silence for exactly 15 seconds. Then Morrison found his voice, trembling and desperate. "That's impossible," he muttered, recoiling as if Diana were an apparition. You were, like a regular contractor." "Lieutenant Morrison," Diana said, her voice now carrying the full weight of 15 years of military command, "you spent an entire week questioning my qualifications, my competence, and my presence on this base. Would you like to explain that behavior to everyone here?" Morrison looked around desperately, seeking support from his fellow SEALs. But they had retreated, physically distancing themselves from him as if his disgrace were contagious. "I didn't know. No one informed me about," he stammered. "About what, exactly?" Diana opened her briefcase and took out a tablet. "About the fact that calling a senior officer milk coffee soldier constitutes serious insubordination? Or about the fact that racial discrimination is a crime under military code?" She activated the screen, and her voice cut through the silence like a knife. The audio recording began to play, Morrison's own voice echoing through the cafeteria. "Hey girl. What's your rank? Coffee with milk soldier." Audible gasps came from several tables. Some soldiers lowered their heads, ashamed that they had laughed the first time. "I have 7 hours of recordings," Diana continued calmly. "Every insult, every joke, every moment you abused a position of power you believed you had. I also have statements from 17 soldiers who witnessed your behavior but were afraid to report it." Morrison tried one last desperate gambit. "You were undercover. This is entrapment. You provoked me on purpose." General Hayes stepped forward, his expression icy. "Lieutenant, are you suggesting that you were forced to make racist comments? That someone forced you to publicly humiliate a woman for a week?" "I just thought she was..." Morrison stopped, realizing that every word only dug him deeper. Diana showed another screen on her tablet. Complete record of messages from the SEALs' private messaging group. "The little black girl won't last a week. Let's teach this visitor her place." 16 documented messages inciting organized discrimination. Morrison's face had turned gray. His fellow SEALs began to move further away, some whispering to each other with horrified expressions. "Colonel Washington," General Hayes asked formally, "what is your disciplinary recommendation?" Diana closed the tablet with a decisive click. "Full court-martial. Insubordination, racial discrimination, conduct detrimental to good order and discipline, and creation of a hostile environment. In addition, I recommend investigation of the entire group involved in the documented messages." Morrison finally exploded, the reality of his situation hitting him like a hammer. "This will destroy my career. 15 years of service. You can't." "I didn't destroy your career, Lieutenant," Diana replied with icy calm. "You did that yourself, one racist joke at a time. I just documented it." General Hayes signaled to the MPs present. "Lieutenant Morrison, you are under arrest for violating Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You will be escorted to detention pending formal investigation." As the MPs approached, Morrison made one last desperate appeal, looking directly at Diana. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. If I had known..." Diana cut him off with a voice that cut deeper than any scream could. "That's exactly the problem, Lieutenant. You felt you had the right to treat me that way because you thought I was vulnerable. You thought there would be no consequences. Your regret isn't for being cruel, it's for getting caught." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Morrison was escorted out of the cafeteria in total silence, his footsteps echoing like hammer blows on a military career coffin. Diana turned to the remaining soldiers, her expression softening slightly. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Military excellence has no color. Leadership has no gender. And dignity is not a privilege, it is the right of every human being who wears this uniform." As the cafeteria slowly came back to life, No one could have imagined that this moment of justice was only the first domino to fall in an investigation that would change protocols at military bases across the country, proving that sometimes true strength lies not in shouting the loudest, but in letting the truth speak for itself. 6 months later, Colonel Diana Washington was back at Naval Station Norfolk, but this time as the new commander of Equality and Diversity for Naval Atlantic Command. Her office, overlooking the same cafeteria where she had been humiliated, now displayed decorations that told the story of an extraordinary career. Morrison had been convicted in a full court-martial. Dishonorably discharged from the military, he had lost not only his 15-year career, but also his military pension and veteran benefits. His former SEAL colleagues crossed the street to avoid him when they saw him in town. "He's working at a car wash now," General Hayes remarked during a meeting. He tried to enlist in the National Guard in another state, but his record followed him. Diana's investigation had expanded nationwide. 16 officers at 7 different bases were prosecuted for systematic discrimination. 3 bases implemented mandatory training programs on respect and diversity. Congress passed the Washington Act legislation that created direct channels for reporting military discrimination without reprisals. On the first anniversary of the cafeteria incident, as it had become known, Diana received an unexpected call. "Colonel Washington? This is Sarah Chun, a journalist with CNN. We are doing a special report on your case. Could you tell us how you feel knowing that your courage has inspired change throughout the military system?" Diana smiled, remembering the frightened girl she once was, facing prejudice at every promotion. "I feel that justice is not a destination, it is a daily journey. Every person who stands up against injustice makes the world a little better." That afternoon, she received a handwritten letter. It was from a young black soldier at a base in Texas. "Colonel, thank you for showing me that our dignity is worth more than the approval of those who despise us. I reported a case of discrimination here, and thanks to your example, I had the courage to refuse to be treated as less than human." Diana kept the letter in a special folder. There were already 347 similar letters from soldiers who had found a voice through her story. That evening, passing through the now multicultural and respectful cafeteria, she remembered the words Morrison had shouted on the day of her arrest, "This will destroy my career." He was right. Her military career was over. But Diana had learned something fundamental. True victory is not destroying those who have harmed you, it is building a future where others do not have to endure the same injustice. Morrison lost everything because he chose to see difference where he should have seen camaraderie. Diana gained everything because she chose to turn humiliation into purpose, discrimination into systemic change. Some try to break our dignity. Others choose to protect it. The difference determines not only who we are, but what kind of world we leave behind. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true justice isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring that the next generation inherits a world that is more just than ours.